Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, and I share my creative process here with you on the internet. If you would like to support this channel, get additional bonus live streams twice a month, be able to read my comic books for free, see tons of behind the scenes process work, you can subscribe to my Patreon campaign. You can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head over to patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. As a matter of fact, tomorrow we're doing one of our twice monthly bonus live streams. We call it Art Book Study Group, where we sit down and examine some of the greatest educational art books around. We've been doing a long-running series on The Figure by Walt Reed, and we'll be having another session tomorrow night. So if you want to get in on that, head over and become a subscriber right now. If you become a subscriber later, all of the replays are available. You can watch the archive videos. There's, probably over 100 hours worth of live streams at this point, because I've been doing the art book study groups for a good long while now. So definitely head over and check that out. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, get work in progress animated GIFs and blog posts delivered right to your inbox, and be the first person to hear when I've got new comics, new art prints, new original artwork for sale, you can sign up for my monthly newsletter. Go to newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you would like to purchase physical copies of my comics, if you read digitally on Comixology or on Kindle, you can head over to amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. It's a self-contained story done in one. All there. You can also pick up volume 1 of my comic book, Morning Star. Morning Star is the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven, but told as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. This book is volume 1. It has issues 1 through 4. So it's the first half of the story. And if you like to read, physical copies, you can actually read the final issue of Morning Star, recently released earlier this year. This is the last issue in the series. You can get this in print at my website, jeremy.net. You can also, there will be links to the Comixology page. You've been reading the series digitally. You can get it on Comixology there as well. All right. So let's get started here. I see Rossi is in the chat. Rossi, thank you for joining me. Byron's here. How you doing? All right, gang. So today we're doing something a little bit different. Some studies, some master studies. There is a link in the chat. There's an artist that I've been looking at a lot lately. I've got an art book of him, William-Adolphe Bouguereau. Bouguereau is was an 18th century French realist painter. And he's somebody who, he almost feels like he's got the polish of the old masters, but the imagination of James Gurney. Like, he draws a lot of realist painting, but also has these beautiful, fantastic artwork as well. A lot of mythological figures. Let me bring up the screen here. So this is a self-portrait that he did. And I've been doing a lot of master studies lately. I've been doing some landscape studies, compositional studies, and I've also been spending a lot of time redrawing my my figure drawing classwork. And there is actually an example. I've been studying with Carl Ganas. You can find his YouTube channel, Ganas Studios. You can find him on YouTube as well. But he recently did a study in class breaking down some Rubens pieces for us. So I thought, you know what? Rubens has definitely become one of my favorite artists in recent years, but I didn't want to just jump in and do a Rubens study just because he did a Rubens study. I probably will do some Rubens studies in the future. But I thought, who else are some artists that I really admire and would like to do some studies from? And Bouguereau is one of those. So if you look both in the description for this video, as well as the in the chat, you can see links to his Wikipedia entry, and the images I pulled are they're in the public domain. So I pulled a couple of images that I'm just going to sit and I'm going to do some figurative studies. So let me explain to you See, this one is a particularly famous painting of his. I believe it's Cupid and Psyche. And like I said, he does a lot of Greek mythology. And there's two types of, before I go into this, I want to explain that the approach I'm doing here is a structural study. So I'm actually studying the figures. The difference is that there's two types of master studies. There's master studies that more in the atelier sense, which ateliers are art schools that are specifically just about the craft, the draftsmanship, the composition, the painting. And there's master studies that you're doing where you're trying to exactly replicate the piece that you're studying from. Meaning you're trying to study every brush stroke, not just the anatomy and the composition, but the colors. You're trying to create a faithful recreation. And the purpose of that is that you want to understand, I'm trying to do a deep dive into understanding every single mark that the painter made. Hopefully by trying to copy them and create a faithful representation, you'll understand why they made the visual decisions that they did. I think that those are very powerful studies. But one, I'm drawing digitally. And I think that this is just my opinion. You can do master studies in different media, but I think that master studies work best when you're working in the same media as the piece you're studying from. If you're studying an oil painting, I think it works better if you're studying in oils. If you're doing if you're studying a charcoal drawing, then to do the replication in charcoal, because then it really is a one-for-one, because every medium works differently. I mean, even oil paintings are different, very different now than they were 200, 300 years ago, the actual oil paints. But the idea of working in the same medium is beneficial. And the second reason is because I don't think that craft-wise, I don't think I'm at the place where doing a faithful study necessarily that I can pull it off. I can do studies for color, I can do studies for composition, or I can do studies for figurative structure, which is what I'm going to do here. So the other type of study, which is the type that I'm going to be doing today, is where I pick an element from the picture. In this case, it's going to be just drawing the figures. Let me make sure I've got my blank layer. The idea here is that I'm going to basically try to copy the pose here in a sketch form and then work out the volumes, work out the anatomies. Anatomies, plural, ridiculous. Yeah, great. See, Amar's in the chat. It says, happy Sunday to all. Rossi also mentioned, I love it all, Greek mythology, etc. Says, I'm learning to speak Greek too. That is impressive. I have a Greek mythology story that I want to do as a comic book at some point. And I would love to actually visit Greece just for a research trip. I mean, to make a nice vacation too, but I hear it's a beautiful country and kind of get a sense of the environments that I would be setting the story in that I want to do. Dizzy also is in the chat. Yo, Dizzy, thanks for popping in. So, as opposed to making a one-for-one replication in terms of a master study, there's doing an analytical study, and that's what I'm going to be going for here. So it's less about copying exactly what I see, and it's more about drawing to try and understand. Let me drop the opacity down on this a little bit. I mean, the fact that I'm not even drawing with a soft brush and building it up, I'm going instead just using kind of a low opacity, my favorite technical brush in Procreate. So I'm starting with just trying to create a long line of action that's kind of representing that line going from the head all the way to that outline, this outline along the figure of Cupid. And then kind of saying, all right, well, first off, he has very, very long legs in comparison to his upper body. They're a little bit long. I mean, his foot is pointed down, but I'm going to kind of, in the middle of that, let's say I'm going to place his hip here. And the first step really is just trying to get the proportions of both figures. So if his hip is right here, I notice going over to the other side, Right next to his hip is the navel of the female figure. So let's say her, I'm going to try and say if his head is ending up here, her head is tucked in underneath his head. So I'm going to draw a line and now give a similar arc. Now her head is turned in towards, her head is turned towards his head, but then her body curves, her neck comes out, and then her body curves back against him. So it's almost like she's kind of mimicking his curve to a certain degree. I'm going to follow this down. And then her feet dangle down a little bit further below his. So I kind of say, all right, if the bottom of his pelvis is here, the bottom of her pelvis is down a little bit further. So I'm starting really just trying to get a stick figure of each person. And for me, this is an interesting balance because doing two figures, you'd think that drawing two figures is twice as complicated as drawing one figure, but really it ends up being like 3 to 4 times, which when you look at those paintings of the old masters where they have like, you know, a crowd scene, it wasn't until I started doing studies like this that I realized just how incredibly challenging those pieces are. Because each time you add a figure, you have a higher level of complexity in terms of parts interlocking. So like I said, I'm just trying to get a stick figure down in terms of like the hands, the knees, the arms, and I'm jumping back and forth from figure to figure. So let's see here. The chat is hot. People are hanging out. Let's see, Byron says the age-old artist excuse for vacation, research. Yes, exactly. I want to research the world. The world has so many different things. You know, I joked about this. I think this might have been something I posted on Patreon. But the idea of switching to becoming a plein air painter simply for the fact that to just travel the world, find places to photograph and to paint, and literally travel becomes my job, and I just document and sell paintings of when I travel. And I have to tell you, I'm not practiced at doing landscape pieces. I've been doing some landscape studies recently. And I'll probably share the videos of those at some point. But it sounds real nice. It sounds real nice to me. Drinking my coffee. Let's see. Amar says, I have some ideas for African, Persian, and Hindu mythology characters for stories. Said the Norse and Greek and other European-based ones are done a lot in comics and movies. Very, very true. In fact, you know, I have a book somewhere in my Kindle on African mythology. And I mean, just the fact that it's saying African mythology, we're just talking about the continent as opposed to, you know, going into Namibian mythology or Kenyan mythology. And like, you know, I haven't even dipped my toe in to find out what the mythologies are of all of the individual nations within Africa. Yeah, but we definitely, you know, we don't get our due in the mythology game. You know, but I think you should definitely go for that. I'm going to try and get in there. It falls into the category of so many things to do and only so much time. So let's see here. Now I'm trying to get a sense of this female figure here. And oddly enough, you know, I feel like I need to make her body. This is the thing right here. Just in looking at the proportions, I want to make her proportions accurate to what I'm looking at, but I also want them to kind of feel correct to me. I think that's another challenge in terms of doing these kinds of studies is I look at this and what is actually in proportion feels a little bit like, um, I feel like her torso should be a little bit shorter in order to accentuate these long legs of hers. And I think I made a mistake here in terms of moving this foot over. Well, not really. This foot down here feels like it's over just a little bit too much. And part of, I will tell you that doing this kind of study while talking is challenging because I realize now that it's like when you're watching your computer choking on it's trying to save a really large file, or you're trying to run a Photoshop filter and that filter is just taking a long time to run. I think what works best when you're doing come here. All right. What works best when you're doing the block in for proportions is to just get in there really fast and knock it out and then begin moving pieces around. And I am finding that the cognitive load of doing that while also talking to you guys and doing it on a multi-figure piece. I mean, it's just 2 figures, but I actually had a second piece on deck because I was thinking, oh, I'm going to do this quick study and it'll take a half hour and then I'll maybe have some time to go in and do a second piece. But I will tell you the cognitive load of drawing something, it's just a simple study of 2 figures, but drawing it while talking is really, really hard. Let's see here. Rossi mentions I'm doing constellation studies now. It's all there. Let's see. Amar says they have a ton of those to work with in terms of mythology. He says the landscape studies look nice. Yeah, I've been sharing my landscape studies on Patreon. Amar's part of the Patreon group there. So I have been sharing those. Again, see, I don't put everything that I do out for a public display, or I don't necessarily put them out. There's some stuff that I put out on Patreon early, and then maybe a week later I'll share them with the public. But yeah, I've been sharing some of those landscape studies. It says, how about blocking the shapes, like where with the landscape studies versus focusing on the sketch? This is like painting with shapes and sculpting the form and tones at the same time. Oh, I understand what you're saying. I think that is, well, the drawing from shape first and then sculpting the anatomy into it, that is kind of the atelier approach. There's a certain approach that I've mostly studied. And the way that I've been studying is, well, it's kind of like Bridgman, the whole idea of constructive anatomy. And it really is about building from the gesture up. And I think you can do gesture drawing with shapes, but those gestures become very broad. And I feel like for me, it's not necessarily that I have anything against working from shape outward. Like I think when you're doing animation, a lot of animation artists will work with silhouette and kind of sculpt the figure. It's not that I have anything against that process. It's more that the linear approach and then filling the figure out, it's sort of just how my brain works, I think that there's something to learn from that. But for me, I think generally working more shape oriented is probably something I do more when I'm trying to work in terms of color. When I'm working on the figure, the thing that I'm thinking about is, like, let's say, to be honest, I really could have simplified this by starting with just, if I look at these 2 figures, I could have said, all right, here is Cupid's rib cage, and here's his pelvis, and then here I keep saying that it's Psyche because Cupid and Psyche are the only Psyche is the only one I know in terms of Cupid mythology. It might not be Cupid and Psyche, but I want to say that they are. Even with this, I'm already moving into volumes. But what I'm trying to do is describe, here's just the two-dimensional blocks of the figure. And then trying to go in there. I think it's because I'm a lot more interested in what's happening internally in the figure, both in terms of gesture and in terms of the actual anatomy. I'm more interested in that than I am creating a one-to-one flat representation of the piece. So, I mean, I'm drawing this thing to do a study in volume. That's why. I mean, that's what it comes down to. The reason why I'm drawing this way is because my approach and my interests are about volume as opposed to proportion. That's why I'm approaching it in a linear fashion. You can sculpt out volume, but I feel like this is a more direct way to explore it. Coming in here and erasing some of the stuff I did, because actually now after drawing that little diagram, I do feel like there's a lot to be gained. By going in and just working from the torso out. So this is the interesting thing. My general approach is to try and block in the whole figure first. Because that helps me keep my proportions. But I'm looking at this and I'm saying, torso out really seems like it is the way to go for this kind of piece. And even with this, I'm noticing the head. I'm looking at how far over Cupid's head is. And in this sense, I am looking at the two-dimensional shape. But the idea of looking at this and saying, all right, how far over is his head? It's like damn near over the center of his knee. I mean, it starts over the center of his knee. So really, I should be putting his head all the way over here. Make this a little bit smaller. Drop that opacity back down, because otherwise I'm going to get caught up in making this whole thing too dark. Oh wait, no, that is not what I want. Opacity low. So let's see here. What's going on in the chat? Rossi says, if I were an ant, I'd stay under a mushroom. Let's see. Byron says, but can you walk and chew gum at the same time? The complexities of talking and drawing. I cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. And this is the drawing equivalent of it. Rossi says, yes, the sculpt to each shape is important. I started my first acrylic painting a couple of days ago, and it's a brick texture painting with graffiti style airbrush. Said I swallow my gum. I don't want a bird to eat it. Well, it was always thrown it in the trash. It says mythology definitely started in Egypt. Yes, Byron says the oldest mythology that we have is Gilgamesh, which is actually Mesopotamian, Akkadian to be exact. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. By the way, like I said, the artist I'm working from, Bouguereau, I put links in both the chat and in the description for this video. So if you want to go to his Wikipedia page, go and check those out. And all of these, this and the other pieces I pulled to do studies from, which look at how long it's taken me to draw this. Who knows if I will even get to those other pieces. But the what was I trying to say? But all of the images I pulled are from the Wikipedia page. So if you want to go and take a look at some Bouguereau, the Wikipedia page is a good place to do it from. All right. Now see, this seems to work a little bit better. I'm going to erase these legs too, because these legs are going to change. You know, it's different with every piece. Sometimes working in terms of a mass of figures does the trick and gets me into the drawing. But for this one, I needed to get in here and say what's going on with the rib cages and trying to get the sense of each rib cage. To try and get the rib cages and how they relate to each other. So having her resting above and in front of him. So he's, you know, the fact that he's turned so that he's wrapping around her, but she's in front of him. This feels like this is probably getting into more detail. Like normally I like to have all of the limbs laid out before I start drawing too much detail of the figure. But in looking at this, it just feels like I need to get this part blocked in before the limbs will even make any sense. You know, and this is the reason why I do these kinds of studies. I don't do these. This isn't me like saying, oh, I'm going to teach you how to draw a multi-figure. I'm doing these studies because these things are, talking while drawing aside, it's a chance for me to explore how I think figure composition works and for me to kick the tires on the way I would normally draw this if I was drawing a comic. Because the way I started, where I just did a line for each figure to just try and figure out, okay, this is how tall this figure is, this is how tall that figure is, and then just kind of build the figures off of that height line. That's how I would do this as a comic. And maybe it's making me realize, oh, by not starting with the just getting the relationship of the rib cages worked out, maybe I'm losing something. And I think, to Amar's point, it would be worth me doing a study of this just in terms of shape. It's a completely different approach than what I'm used to doing. But it's a valid approach. And the same way that doing this is making me rethink how I'm starting a drawing, doing that approach may make me discover new things about composition and how to build a piece. But now you can see I'm starting to get that sense, even though I haven't even put the feet in yet. Now this feels more like, okay, you've got a sense of two bodies pressed together. One wrapping its arm around the other. And I can kind of like draw a line here, like, so this little circle that I'm putting in here, like, okay, this is where his shoulder, like, if he's moving his shoulder forward, as opposed to his shoulder being out to the side over here, I'm giving you the sense of, oh, his shoulder is pulled forward, and the fact that we're looking at the side of his figure. Even though I've got this line running down here, that's not the center line of his figure. If I erase this, the center line is actually over here because he's turned away. This is the side of his rib cage right here. So his center line is there. And then it's curving over. And I'll tell you, I'm looking at this, and sort of like his center line is here. I may be pushing this a little bit more than it needs to be, but it's like his center line is here. His navel is aimed forward, like just straight forward. And then when you get down to the base of his pelvis, it's turned ever so slightly to the right. Not way off to the right, but just slightly. Oh, but I was started talking about showing where his arm is coming from. And so what I'll do is I'll figure out, okay, if his arm is up here, I'll look down and just say, all right, well, where does his arm end? His arm tucks in a little bit above her elbow on the other side of her waist. And I can just say, all right, it goes in a kind of one fluid line. And then off of that line, I can build a volume. So I can look and say, all right, the elbow is crossing over her arm. So it's not all the way over the center line of her torso, but it's over here. And then I can flush this out. This is a little bit kind of like what you were saying, Amar, in the sense of just saying, okay, I can just draw the two-dimensional, like the outlines of his arm, and then I can come back in and flush that out with volume later. In fact, even in here, I can come in with the eraser and erase a little bit of what I put in there. Not a whole lot, because I still want to see some of that. So yeah, I'm going to come back and fill that out more, give you more of the sense of his shoulder. But I can come in here now and say, all right, her arm, she's got her shoulders up like this. Again, that upper arm is pressed firmly against his body. Her elbow ending a little bit below his navel. Having this crossing back in. Let's see here. Amar, back on mythology, says Sumerian mythos is older than that of Mesopotamia. And Byron, of course, comes in with the cosign. You are correct. Let's see, Amar says, I already have a universe set up based on ancient civilization. See, look at that. Amar, always on the go, ahead of the game, man. He says they also have Egyptian myths that are almost 2,000 years before the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh. Let's see. Rossi mentioned mythology began long before Ishtar. And Amar says, I was literally saying, just saying create blocks as if you were painting, if you were painting with an angle stump or a palette knife. I see what you're saying. Just coming in with big wedges. Let's see here. And I think the other thing, this isn't even a particularly complex piece, but trying to work out how the volumes are crossing over each other and interacting. I don't want to over complicate it. And the fact that I'm drawing, hands that are over, crossing over torsos, crossing over other hands. It's not necessarily that this piece, this image is an extremely complex one. It's that it is subtle and dynamic. And to be honest, those subtle dynamics to me are the challenging things to draw. After all of that, working out the rib cage without even really paying. Normally, see, that's the thing. I would normally never think of going into this much detail on the torso and not having drawn the legs at all. But only now am I getting to the point where I feel like I filled out enough of this that I can come in and say, all right, what's going on with the legs? So, I've got her body in front of him, but then his leg comes forward, crossing over her body now. So I can come in and just look at about how far down below her leg he goes. And this is actually pretty similar. When I talk about the art book study group, when we're looking at Walt Reed's The Figure, studies like this are kind of the mainstay of the art book study group. Coming in and just trying to work out simple volumes. Of course, we spent a lot of time in the Walt Reed book just covering, covering structure. That's kind of what the first chapter is. It's all structure and learning to think in terms of simple volumes. We're only getting into anatomy like in this next section that I'm getting ready to start tomorrow. Let's see here. I see Cassiel is in the chat. Thanks for dropping by. Cassiel asks how I copy Bridgman, like how I started drawing of him. I begin with gesture drawing and bones, or I just copy direct observing and calculating. That is a great question, and I will tell you that it is it is exactly what art book study groups started out of. First off, I would say the answer is, in my opinion, gesture and bones. Um, and I will say that art book study group grew out of the fact that I used to copy, and haven't done it in a while, but I used to copy George Bridgman's Dynamic Anatomy, or his no, not Dynamic Anatomy. That's that's Bert Hogarth. Constructive Anatomy, or what's the name of the other one? Because now I have the book that has all of them together, but I still have the original books. But oh, The Human Machine, Constructive Anatomy, and The Human Machine. Those are the two books that I would twice a year. I would just sit down and copy the entire book, and I would do exactly what I'm doing here, where I wasn't copying to try and create a faithful line for line replication. I was trying to understand the anatomical ideas communicated in the book. And so I would say you could look at any Bridgman drawing and do this kind of analysis where you look at it and try to break it down into simple volumes, create, whether you're drawing bones or muscles or drawing that as a combination of both, that the challenge is how to take what you're looking at and to conceptualize it as three-dimensional volumes. That's the challenge, both here and for studying Bridgman. And that's pretty much what I do when I do studies. So like I said at the top of this video, I believe that there is great value in doing a faithful one-for-one master study replication. But, where I am as an artist, I feel like there's so many things on a structural level and a compositional level that I still struggle with, that my interests and my instincts lead me away from the one-for-one studies and lead me towards analytical studies, which is what I'm doing now and what I would recommend if you're approaching Bridgman. And I'm curious to hear what other folks in the chat say. If you have studied Bridgman on your own, what has been your approach? Is it similar to what I'm doing? Do you have a different way that you look at George Bridgman? And if you haven't been studying Bridgman, who are the educational artists that you look at? For a lot of you, this channel, has started out being all about drawing comics. For you guys, has it been drawing comics the Marvel way with John Buscema? Or, Bert Hogarth? I made a Freudian slip there, but for a lot of people, Dynamic Anatomy is their first anatomy book. It was my first anatomy book. And yes, I know a lot of people criticize him greatly for how much he exaggerates the anatomy. But while he is no longer my go-to, I'm grateful for what I learned from him studying early on. Let's see here. Amar mentions that that mythos is always a great starting point for public domain source material to easily create stories from. Yeah, I mean, the mythologies, all mythologies, those original stories are the things that some people say that there's only 8 real stories, there's only 3 real stories. Some people say there's really only one story, and people just tell it over and over again, dressed up different ways. All of those fundamental stories about, man versus man, man versus nature, man versus self, person versus self. All of those things, come from the primitive cultural. When I say primitive, I mean in terms of just the early ideas of civilization. Those initial stories that people tell to communicate, tribal or cultural mores, metaphors, or just plain old entertainment. And I'm wondering, looking at this, if I need to make, I feel like I do need to make Cupid's leg a little bit shorter, but it's shorter because I feel like it should be going further back in space now that I'm looking at this a little bit larger. Have any of you guys heard of Bouguereau before? Because within people who study magic realism, he's definitely somebody, along with like John Singer Sargent. It's sort of like John Singer Sargent is like the realist, like doing beautiful portraits, but Bouguereau is sort of like the fantastical. Like I would definitely put him in there with Sargent, a precursor to Norman Rockwell, definitely a master of the techniques of the old masters. But he is somebody who was one of the most famous artists in the world in his time. But then, believe it or not, he started as the Expressionists started coming in, and the Impressionist movement. His work started to fall out of favor, kind of crazily as it sounds, because he was too good at being like a realist. Like people were criticizing him for drawing, I guess, the surface, just capturing reality, which, I mean, look, he's got a woman being carried off by an angel. Well, a wood nymph being carried off by an angel here. He definitely, in my opinion, is drawing the fantastical. But the point is that he was once one of the most famous artists in the world and then eventually fell out of favor, which just seems nuts to me. And he's in recent years come back into, I don't want to say back into vogue, but as people have come to appreciate imaginative realism more and more in contemporary art, there's been new books and a resurgence in people appreciating his work. And that's how I discovered him. So I'm curious if any of you guys have heard of Bouguereau before. And if you haven't, definitely take a look. In fact, you know what? I'm not going to get to it in this live stream, but the other piece that I was going to do, and maybe I'll leave it up to you guys whether you want me to continue with doing personal work or if you want me to do another study next week. But the other piece I was going to do, this is probably my favorite Bouguereau painting of all time. And this was the other piece I was going to do a study of. And this is Dante and Virgil in Hell from Dante's Inferno. So Dante and Virgil are over in the back, looking down, watching these sinners fighting over each other, tearing each other's throats out. There's a demon floating in the background. There's all these writhing masses of figures behind them. I mean, this looks like a straight up Frazetta painting, and it's just like, it is savage and it's metal. And I remember watching the TV show Succession. I've only watched a couple of episodes, but Succession on HBO, when the second season was coming out, there were ads for the TV show where it had the family sitting around a dinner table, and this painting is in the background on like the wall above the dinner table, just kind of implying how savage the family is and turning against each other. And I saw that, and I was like, damn, they got a Bouguereau in the background. Like I was proud of myself for knowing who the artist was, and I thought it was awesome that it happened to be one of my my favorite pieces by the artist. So, I mean, Bouguereau, yeah, he does a lot of he's known for doing beautiful figures, beautiful work that is fantastical, but he can get gritty. He gets into it. And obviously, as you can look from this, he's like a master of anatomy, So that is another piece. My point being is simply, I would encourage you to check out more of Bouguereau's work. I was curious how many other people were familiar with him. Well, yeah, let's see here. Let me scroll back up. The lively, the chat is lively. Yeah, Byron says in this particular image, the legs follow the torso in a flowing motion, so working on the torso's positioning matters a lot. Yeah, I mean, when I started with it, my normal method of just creating the height and saying, all right, this is the proportion, work everything into it. Yeah, that was the wrong approach to start this figure with. And I've done some figures where I started with what I'm doing here with the torso proportions and positions, and then I end up getting if I'm not blocking out the entire figure, sometimes the proportions get wonky. So it's weird. It's kind of an ongoing battle for me. Rossi mentions, I'm looking at my life drawing, studying my own pieces. It's definitely a huge help. Well, you're very welcome. I'm glad to share it. In fact, the video I did last week, I don't know if you caught it, but I've got lots of videos if you just search for figure drawing, where I go through my drawings from class and I look at the ones that did not come out well. And I call it fixing bad figure drawing. And it's just me going through and redrawing my work from class and trying to analyze and refine and just understand what it is that I did wrong working from the model. And that is probably one of the biggest things that has helped me grow as an artist. Because if we don't take a step back and take a look at our actual mistakes, then we just keep saying, all right, well, why am I not getting better? Or why do that's really what it comes down to, is I ask myself, why am I not improving as fast as I would like to? And the answer was because I'm not analyzing my mistakes. And along with doing studies like this, coming back and just looking at my own work and kind of dissecting it, doing an autopsy on my work really, really helped me and continues to help me in terms of growing, understanding. I'm at the point now where it's like it never stops helping me. It is probably one of my favorite, to the detriment of me getting more comic work done, because I am so now obsessed with this process of redrawing and analyzing and looking at my work and trying to figure it out, that I just get caught up in it. And I'm like, oh, well, I end up spending more time doing that than I do actually making new stuff. So with everything, you have to find a balance to learn to stay productive and continue with whatever you're doing. Unless you're somebody who is teaching full time, in which case, that's all you're going to be doing is just working on your understanding and refining it. Interesting. He almost has a tangent here with the feet in terms of like framing the feet. Oh, and I noticed like his legs are farther apart than mine. I've got the front foot overlapping. On mine, I've got it overlapping the leg, whereas with him, he's got it, there's a little bit of space between them. I don't necessarily feel like in terms of doing a study that I have to correct that. It feels like a minor change to me, but I'm noting it because I may come in and as I'm refining this, come in and say, oh, I should have caught that. Or I may in the course of doing the study discover why he made that decision. So I don't discount these things. I notice it and I make a note. But at the moment, I'm like, okay, well, he made that different change. Not a big deal. And then I may be coming in and drawing and say, oh, wait, no, that is a big deal. And now I understand why. So it's another thing. You learn these things through the process of doing these studies. Let me dig into the chat for a little bit, because there's a lot of great comments that came in while I was drawing and jabbering. With Amar, he mentioned in terms of art books that he first started looking at. He said first it was the Marvel Way, and then it was Bern Hogarth. And Cassiel says, I have a PDF of Bern Hogarth. He's a master of anatomy. Rossi says upper legs are the most boring area to sketch, in my opinion. Just nothing fun. Well, you might say that, but I will tell you, for me, what I find interesting is, and this is something one of the frequent commenters and member of the Patreon community, Negro Frazetta, he mentions Peter Hahn, the instructor, an artist, and he's got a book called Dynamic Sketching, the Dynamic Sketch Bible. And what's interesting is to take very simple primitive shapes and do interesting things with them. Like if I were to draw Let me turn up the opacity here. So this feels a little bit more like a ballpoint pen. But let's say that you're just drawing like a wedge. So you've just got a wedge that's sitting here. You might say, all right, that wedge isn't particularly interesting. Now, what Peter Hahn does is he looks at these. Let me give you this so you can get a sense that that's the side of that wedge. What Peter Hahn does that I think is really interesting is he'll take simple shapes and he'll challenge you to make those shapes, as he says, dynamic. And I've never taken a class with Peter Hahn, but I've looked at his books. A friend of mine let me borrow one of his books, and I've watched a bunch of his videos. And I really like what he says about defining shape and volume, because this whole thing is, I'm not drawing a specific object here. This could be a spaceship. It could be some sort of futuristic building. It could be a boat. It could be the canopy of a fighter jet. Whatever it is, it's a simple shape, and he's just making it feel slick and giving it a sense of energy in life. Now, how does this relate to the upper thigh? Is that the same way that he treats treats any primitive shape? He says, you like this thigh that I've got that's coming forward, the upper thigh. Now, if you don't find anything interesting about that, that's fair. You look at it and you're not into it. But when I look at that, I think about this object that is coming straight at us, and it's got a front and a top and a side, but also it's curving in space. It's both a wedge, but it's also rounded and larger in the back, and then has this other shape kind of sculpting out of the front. So it's like thick in the upper part of the thighs and then narrows as it comes towards us. And then don't forget that the thigh actually has tendon that's reaching around to the front of the bones in the tibia and the fibula. And to me, what's going on in terms of the dynamics of the upper thigh, just capturing the foreshortening of it, capturing the anatomy, making it feel, as we've mentioned, we're using the word dynamics a lot. The subtleties of the kneecap, and then the fat tissue underneath the knee. Zoom in a little bit because I'm getting into the weeds here. To me, being able to convey all of these things in the thigh, in the upper thigh, the upper leg, they are extremely challenging, and those challenges are what's interesting to me. So, I would say that, if that part of the anatomy doesn't really do much for you, I would challenge you to say, all right, well, how can I make it more interesting? What are the things that you do find interesting, and try to look for those things in the anatomy. Because for me, it's like, it's not necessarily what is the part of the body that I'm drawing and how is that interesting. It's, am I creating some dynamics in the form no matter what part I'm drawing, whether it's a leg, a neck, a foot. All of these things can be extremely, extremely dynamic. And the challenge is capturing those dynamics in your drawing. So yeah, that's just a thought there in terms of the upper thigh. I mean, honestly, even drawing the upper thigh when it's just standing straight, you've got this huge mass of the quadricep muscles, and you've got the knee underneath it. You've got the adductors on the inside. You've got the hip on the outside. And then just trying to capture that sense of like, let me turn my opacity back down, my brush size back up. I know I could come in here with a soft brush, but just trying to capture that sense of, let me zoom in again. That sense of simple lighting. You know, trying to sculpt this thing, it's not, for me, it's not about, oh, this part of the anatomy is boring. It's that there's forms and volumes here, and making those forms and volumes, no matter what part of the body I'm drawing, feel sculptural. That to me is the challenge and what's really interesting. And trying to draw the thigh and making these volumes, and the fact that the quadriceps, you know, you can see the different muscles that are broken up inside. I just drew it as one big mass, but you know, I haven't even gotten into drawing the individual muscles of the quadriceps. To me, this stuff is super fascinating. So, you know, what I would challenge you to do is to maybe look at the thigh and say, well, what are the things that I do find fascinating, and how do I bring those into this part of the anatomy? And this is something that, you know, I find this fascinating no matter what angle I'm drawing the thigh from. You can, you know, draw it from that excuse me, that foreshortened angle that I first drew, where it's coming right at you. You can draw it in a more dynamic, you know, you can draw it in this just a simple standing forward. You can draw it from the rear, you know, drawing and the fact that the quadriceps and the thighs change significantly depending on whether the leg is straight or bent. There's so many dynamic things that go on with the muscle groups of the upper thigh. I'm just saying that there's more in there, maybe, that you might not have noticed. If that feels boring to you, then maybe I'm just saying that there's more to look at. All right. All right. That's enough on my rant. Let me get back to the chat. We're already an hour in. And look, I didn't even finish doing this study. I think I'll draw a little bit more. And basically what I just did here, I'm going to try and do that to this figure real quick. So maybe we'll go for like another 20 minutes or half hour or something. But let me get back to everybody in the chat, because, you know, got caught up in the drawing there. Need more coffee to power through. Yeah, Amar says, Bern Hogarth taught me how to do hands well and how to do detailed muscles, which is what you want to do for comics. He said Loomis and Bridgman get more into structure and how to draw the anatomy. Byron says, with Bridgman, I started copying wholesale, and anything I didn't fully understand, Proco helped me. In terms of comics, I actually got most of my studying done through Japanese masters, which I watch. Yeah, you know what, Proco, there are some Japanese and Chinese painters who I've looked at there more for a surface painting technique. But Proko's videos, yeah, they're great. I've learned a lot from them. I've mentioned that I bought my dad Proko's portrait course because my dad likes drawing and painting, but he's not as interested in the full figure and the volumes like I am. He's more into just classical portraiture, and so I bought him Proko's course, and he really enjoyed it. Cassiel says, but you've questioned how the old masters like Michelangelo how old masters like Michelangelo draw the human figure and faces like they just start with a gesture drawing and put the anatomical forms. Well, I think that, yeah, the old masters really did kind of draw the approach that I've learned from Carl Ganas. Very much is start with your gesture, add volumes, primitive, simple volumes, and then add anatomy to those volumes. And I'm going to show you when I go into this piece. Basically, this is me going from gesture to volume. So at this point, I have blocked in all of the basic volumes in this study. So now I'm going to go in and just refine the anatomy. So it's not going to be super rendered. It's not going to be like Bridgman level anatomy. But I'm just going to kind of just refine it so that, as like for instance, the arm that's crossing, Cupid's arm that's wrapping around the woman. Right now it's just a tube. So I'm going to try to transform it from a tube into an actual arm. Let's see. So Amar mentions, I think for me, Byrne was great reference when I first started out. Cassiel also says, Byrne Hogarth is great for reference for dynamic poses for gesture. Let's see. Yeah, Amar says there was no Proko when I started out. He's saying to Byron, you and me both. Our ass is old. Says people like him are great though if you started doing art in 2010 to 2020s. Says I saw my first book in the 80s, drawing the Marvel Way and Byrne Hogarth in the 90s. Yeah, lots of Hogarth here. And Byron also says definitely Proko. Let me see here. I skipped a few. I'm going back up. A lot of great comments in here. Wow. All right, I'm gonna have to rush through reading these. There's you guys have a lot of great comments, so I want to make sure I shout them out. You know what? Let me see. I'm gonna skip. I'm gonna skip around because there's a lot of people mentioning kind of the same books. So I'm just gonna skip around and see if there's any different things that pop out. Amar does mention on the piece I'm working. He says, yeah, it does look like the neck is slightly exaggerated, but it works. Yeah, the necks are long here. And what's interesting, I mean, in this piece, the male has kind of a long neck. I will tell you, as brilliant as Michelangelo is, I look at Michelangelo's pieces and I'm like, that neck is too goddamn long. I mean, but they're beautiful. So I think that goes back to that old thing that I think a lot of comic artists hear when they say, if it looks right, it is right. Because there's some stuff that even if it's a little bit wonky, you're just like, but if it looks elegant, it works, you go with it. And plus, I think, there are people who very long, elegant models, a lot of figure drawing models, and I'm sure back the same. Well, it depends. If you're Rubens, maybe, it's more about the curvy models. But, in the Renaissance, there was definitely the long, elegant models. Let's see, Cassiel mentions I learned a lot of gesture from Michael Hampton, the Force Method, and David Finch. Yeah, David Finch's YouTube channel is great. Let's see, he says, I copy studies of Frazetta with mannequins. I've been meaning to do a Frazetta study. I'm going to do it at some point. Got to get through it. Let's see here. Yeah, Amar says, I tried Michael Hampton based on recommendations where I received it. Based on where I didn't find it helpful at all. Let's see, yeah. Finch is helpful for the cross-hatching. Let's see here. Yeah, more Hogarth. Yeah, Rossi also mentions Dynamic Light and Shade, Dynamic Anatomy and Hands. Those are the 3 books. I have Dynamic Anatomy, and I think I have Dynamic Folds and Drapery. I don't know if I have his Dynamic Hands book. I might. I got a lot of art books. Let's see here. Yeah, Amar mentions that the Hampton book. He said there were too many better resources to work with, but use what you have. Yeah, Byron says I have a PDF of the Dynamic Bible. It's great for quick reference and readability. Let's see. Rossi says that is so beautiful. Yeah, the Bouguereau piece is beautiful. And I hope that my studies of it are helpfully attractive. Let's see. Let's see here. Rossi also says necks are very sexy. You see, Amar mentions Byrne's style is made for exaggerated comic book art. I mean, hell, he was the artist on Tarzan for years. So yeah. Let's see here. But it also says you can't deny the detail in the way the muscles wraps for his dynamic hands and figures. Let's see here. Kessiel says gesture is corporal expression, exaggerating the movements. The more expressive we have, a big general interest in movement because the world is always in movement. It's philosophical, yes. Let's see here. Amar says, does help people. You never studied cadavers, done a ton of figure drawing, or really studied anatomy. Says, I do wish I did go into medical illustration, and right now I would be a master figure in anatomy. I was very lucky. The high school that I went to had an advanced anatomy class, and we got to go to an orthopedic hospital where they study cadavers, and we were allowed to go in and, as high school students, and examine. We had to have things where parents signed waivers that was okay because they're taking high school kids to see dead bodies. But yeah, it was very fascinating to go and examine cadavers. It was very humbling and solemn because we're there with these people who have passed away and have dedicated their bodies to science. But yeah, it was definitely eye-opening. We weren't able to sit down and sketch while we were there, which I really wish I had done. And plus, when you're sketching, well, you know what? The Body Worlds exhibit. If you guys ever get a chance to go to a Body Worlds exhibit, go. I went. I took a sketchbook with me. I spent like the whole day just sketching, doing tons of drawings. And in fact, they had like 3 different books there. They had the book from the original exhibition, the book from the exhibition that I was currently seeing, and then they had one that was a Body World that was just animals. And it's great because you see them at the skeletal level, the muscular level, subcutaneous with all the fat. They've got them posed. It's a fascinating exhibition. I highly recommend it. I do have a video of my sketches. So if you look up Body Worlds on my channel, you can see some of the drawings and studies I did from there. Byron says, as a thigh man, I agree. Ain't nothing boring about it. I feel you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Amar says, I was the only one into studying the cadaver while most were scared of seeing the body in that state. I would love to be able to paint and sculpt my comic book art without underdrawing to find a style that speeds up the overall process. I think that's interesting. When we first started talking and you mentioned working in terms of broad shapes as opposed to the underlying drawings, the stick figures. The thing is, for me, the underdrawing, I've actually always been more interested in the underdrawing than the actual drawing. In fact, when I look at artists, I tend to like sketches more than like finished art. And the more I can see the construction lines, I love construction lines. I love construction lines and watching and seeing how a drawing is constructed. And I think that, I'm not saying that is the right way to approach drawing. I'm saying that my personal interests lean far more towards that than having a, a rendered image, capturing just a flat piece that accurately depicts what I'm trying to represent and has the right shading and toning. For me, I'm much more interested in sort of the interior construction than I am, more of the surface elements. So, it's just personal choice and what we're drawn to as artists. But I think that's why when we first started talking about it and you made the suggestion, I was like, it's not necessarily what I go for. That's the reason why. I love construction. Let's see here. I'm going to skip through a few more comments. Boom, 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 boom. Rossi mentions, I always tell myself learning the names of every muscle in the human body other than the basics. And it's funny. That's something that we touched on in the art book study group recently, because I honestly don't think you really do need, if you're drawing for illustration or comics or animation, you really don't need to know every muscle and bone in the body. You can learn the major muscle groups and you've got everything you need, the major masses to just draw. For me, I've fallen in love with studying anatomy through taking figure drawing classes, so I do a deeper dive in it, but I don't think it's necessary. So it really comes down to what you're going to use that knowledge for. But having it just to have it, not really necessary. Let's see here. Byron mentioned, by Japanese masters, I meant mangaka. There's a great documentary series called Manben that shows great mangaka creating manga in their process. I have watched 1 or 2 episodes. I've seen them on YouTube or on other social platforms. And the reason why I have not watched all of them is simply because they're subtitled, so you have to look at them while you're watching them. And generally, I need my eye. If I have something on, I tend to have it on and it's playing in the background while I'm looking down at drawing. I'm just listening to it. And then I'll occasionally look up and see things that are interesting. There's not a lot of stuff that I watch where I just sit and I am just looking at it. So that's the reason why I haven't sat down and watched a lot of it. But I've heard great things about the Manben series. I've watched a little bit of it. And I think I will go back and watch some more now that we're talking about it, because I haven't seen it in a while. Let's see here. Amar mentioned hips and thighs are my thing, solid calves as well. He says, not for this one, it was for the other image you showed. He says, also, could you share this image in your Discord? Let's see. I'm not sure if you're talking about the image that I have up here that I'm working on, but I will definitely share that in the Discord. If there's a different image that you meant for me to share, let me know. I can also share the Bouguereau piece as well. Let's see. Byron mentions, with the necks of Michelangelo, it was part of the beauty standards of the time. Long necks, extremely fair skin, almost elf-like in a lot of ways. And Rossi says, I do look like an elf. And then Amar says, yes, the image you have on screen now. Yeah, I will definitely share this on the Discord server. So that's another thing for you guys with people on Patreon, our members of the Patreon community. I go through and a lot of my personal figure drawing studies that I do, I'll just share. We have a private Discord server, and we kind of share art with each other, give each other feedback and encouragement, and just look at a lot of work together. So it's just a deeper level of sharing, and I'll post a lot of stuff. There's some stuff that I post that I don't even put on, that I'm never necessarily going to share on main on social media. But there's a lot of studies that I'm doing all the time that I will put on there. I'm just going to darken up the opacity here. So in terms of converting stuff like this into more of the anatomy, there's first me putting a light curve in here just to give me a little bit more sense of volume. Now, really, when I'm drawing this, even though there's more muscles than just the biceps and the triceps and the deltoids, I'm fine with just getting the shoulder muscle in here. Switch this technical pen eraser. Whoa, that's too big. So, there's something very simple that's happening here, which is the forearm, I mean, not the forearm, the upper arm is coming slightly towards us. The elbow bends, and then the lower arm, the forearm, is moving slightly away from us. And so I will come in here and just try to capture, simple bits of anatomy. So I've got this coming like just a tube, then I'll give you a little bit of that that muscle of the forearm coming up and over. And this goes back to, I think, what Cassiel was asking earlier about just adding anatomy to the basic volume. And yeah, that's it. Just working on the structure, then converting that stick figure into volumes, and then taking these volumes and for a lot of this, I'm not going to come in here and erase everything and try to make it look, I'm not prettifying it. It's more like, as I mentioned earlier, my personal obsession is in the construction lines. I'm just trying to almost like drawing a 3D model. That's really how I'm looking at it. Like I'm trying to work out the wire framing here. In fact, I'm probably putting too much anatomy in here. In fact, I've got to end this shoulder sooner so you can get that sense of the lats, latissimus, coming over the back. And even this, I didn't really capture in the gesture how much that how much of a pull there is in terms of that arm really pulling over. I will tell you that I'm not selling it as much as I should. But really getting that sense of that arm coming up and over the back. So let's see. Cassiel says, I think in study architecture to help draw environments and maybe complex forms is a good idea. Yes. I actually have not spent much time I've been doing, I mentioned at the top that I've been doing some landscape studies or environmental studies. That's something I actually have not shared here, but I was doing some studies of what's his name? The Western artist, Remington, Frederick Remington. We're doing some studies of Remington, and specifically there's a piece that I just finished recently, the cover for Morningstar Volume 2. And I'm proud of it, but I still feel like the landscape is not necessarily as accomplished as I would like it to be. And that's what led me to say, all right, I need to do some landscape studies on my own, as opposed to with anybody else. But point being is, yes, I think that doing landscape studies and environmental studies are very good for analyzing complex shapes and environments. Let me give you a quick tip. I don't know if your local library has a lot of art books or if you're in a position to be able to buy many art books. But if you're interested in studying landscape, I'm going to recommend a great book to you. The art instructor Jack Ham has a book called Drawing Scenery and Landscapes. It's this blue covered book. I don't think that the covers of his books are necessarily that great. The covers of his books don't. Hang on, because this is tiny. I got to switch to me. There we go. I don't think that the covers of his books necessarily convey just how great the books are. But these are some of the best books out. This one is one of the best books on environment and landscape drawing. Now, when I say that, it's very old-fashioned. If you're somebody who studies a lot of concept art, you're watching like Scott Robertson design an environment, his stuff is a lot more concept arty, and it's going to feel a lot more advanced than this. But much in the way that Bridgman and Loomis talk about the fundamentals, these are more about the fundamentals of drawing sceneries and environments. It's kind of like Robertson does teach the fundamentals, but he teaches so much more of the advanced, polished stuff that goes on top of it. And the fundamentals, I think, in every form of drawing, the fundamentals get glossed over because people want to quickly jump to more advanced subjects. And I spend a lot of time studying the fundamentals because the more I draw, I find that the fundamentals are what makes the drawing succeed. If you have the fundamentals down, you can do something that's as simple and cartoonish as Bruce Timm. You can do something that's highly as rendered as like an Adam Hughes or Alex Ross. You could be like I forget the name of the concept artist from Metal Gear. Yoji Shinkawa, I think his name is. But point being is that there's tons of artists that do extremely complex, beautiful work, but it's because they've mastered the fundamentals, not because the style that they're rendering is a dope style. So yes, I would definitely recommend doing some studies in terms of environment and I would recommend checking out that book. I didn't even notice while I was drawing this a great sense of. I didn't even notice how the fabric that's wrapped around Psyche also wraps around the upper thigh. And this is nice because it just gives you a simple, as opposed to having to draw, it gives you a little bit of the foreshortening in the fabric. The fabric is helping you sell that you're looking at something that is a cylinder that's coming towards you that has fabric wrapping around it. And this is one of those things that's a great compositional trick, a tool that they're putting in the drawing to give you that sense of putting something else in there that very clearly describes what the construction is doing. Let's see here. comments in the chat. Ah, yes, Byron co-signed on that. Yoji Shinkawa for Metal Gear. Yeah, Amar co-signs on that. The Jack Ham book, says that was recommended to him a long time ago. And Cassiel says, I heard that the How to Draw book from Scott Robertson is good. It is good. I own it. But I have not taken a deep dive on it because it's a very complex book. And that is not a negative, but it's more that I've been so focused on trying to up my level of fundamentals and doing more of the simple structural stuff that I'm like, look, this comes back to the whole art book study group thing again, in that the premise of it is that I have a tremendous number of art books. And out of the number of art books I have, only a few of them have I really done a deep dive and studied all of the material in it. And then I wonder why I don't draw with the level of mastery that I would like. So the art book study group is literally just me saying, okay, I'm just going to take all of the books that I own that I have not studied from, and I'm going to start studying from them. And I share that process of studying with you guys. And when it comes to the Robertson book, I am going to get to it. But there's so many other books in front of it that I've had for years that really, I'm like, if I took the time to really learn what's in these books, we keep saying, how do I get better? How do I get faster? I wish I were a better artist, or I wish I was further along in my art journey. I think that one of the things that helps is to sit down with the material, the resources we have, and do studies. That's why I'm doing this Bouguereau study. I've slowed down on actually producing like new personal works because I'm like, I've hit a pocket lately. And part of this, I think, is finishing Morningstar. And I feel like now that I'm done with such a long project, I want to level up a little bit before I start my next project. But I've been really trying to dive in and doing studies, not just with the art book study group in general, but the things like me doing these Bouguereau studies, or the time I've spent doing more extensive figure studies of my work from the class I'm taking. It's me saying, all right, if I want to get better, I need to spend the time just working on this stuff. And I think a lot of people just think, well, if I just draw, I'll just naturally get better. And you do improve. But when you draw with the intention of saying, okay, here's a thing I want to get better at, and doing a deep dive on it. I've bought many art books over the years and just never cracked them open. And so the art book study group is me saying, all right, let me do a deep dive on Andrew Loomis. Let me do a deep dive on George Bridgman. Let me do a deep dive on Ken Holtgren doing animal drawings. And it's just saying, okay, let's try to use the things that are out there that other art educators have provided us, and try to really see if I can push myself forward. So you can see here, I'm coming in and I'm adjusting the shape and position of that calf. And I'm trying to get it to go back into space a little bit more. So, as I mentioned, that it seemed like I drew it a little bit like not high enough. Not high enough in terms, I was drawing the leg too long. And if you think about it from a perspective standpoint, I'm going to throw a cross axis across the thigh here. If you think about this from a perspective point, if you take like, oh crap, I've just been drawing and not showing you guys what I'm drawing. Sorry about that. I got caught back up. Got caught up in here. All right, yeah. So I've been going in here, refining. Dude, the whole thing I was talking about with the fabric. I realized I must have been drawing and not showing that. It's this thing right here. That piece of fabric wrapping around the leg. Apologies for that. But yeah, that fabric reaching around the leg. Anyway. Oh, wait. See, now I'm flipping right back out again. This time I will remember to come back. And if I ever do that, where I'm just like, hey, you're not showing what you're drawing, then definitely mention it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Amar called out. Said you stop sharing your screen. But what I was going to say is, okay, so here's the, yeah, Amar did exactly what I hoped you would do. I just wasn't looking at the chat either. But, you know, I had the leg. I had the leg going straight down. I realized if I need to angle it going, if I have it angling back more, then it's going to become shorter. Like you can even see, like here's my shirt. Like see how the current tangent is touching the tip of my shirt. If I tilt it away, it becomes shorter because I'm looking at it in perspective now. And so I realized that as I'm pushing the, let me now properly switch back to sharing my screen. So now as I'm, here's the cross axis that I was talking about. As I'm angling his leg going back in space, moving away from us, the foot is becoming shorter. So that was the thing that I realized, oh, I figured I would correct that in the in this stage where I'm coming here and kind of adding more of the anatomy. Let's see. Amar mentions everyone wants to be at the finish line without doing any of the work. Word. Yeah, I mean, part of it is that I no longer find doing the work frustrating because I very much understand just wanting to make the stuff you want to make. And for a long time, that was the attitude I had. It wasn't about, for a long time, I was studying as a means to an end, meaning I'm studying to make comics. And that's the only reason why I'm trying to get better at figure drawing or environments or any of that other stuff. And now, after so many years of studying, I am studying for, I still want to continue to make comics and artwork, but I am studying very much because I love studying and analyzing these things. And I find this process of studying anatomy fascinating. That foot's not the best foot I ever drew. I'm gonna hide that in some speed lines. Not speed lines, but some volume lines. Either way, that's going back in space. But yeah, doing the work. At a certain point, you I can understand being frustrated by it, but once I started to really enjoy doing the work for the sake of the work, it made the entire process of learning, whether I'm in class or I'm staying on my own, it became much more enjoyable. Let's see. Cassiel asks about how to draw creatures you can indicate a book. Amar mentions get really good at drawing humans and animals. Then you can create any creature you like. That's a really good tip in terms of imagining things. I'm trying to think, what books do I have? I've got books. I've got 3 books on animal drawing. One is I've got more books than just this, and yes, I will do my best to remember to flip back. This one's one of my favorites. Ken Holtgren's The Art of Animal Drawing, Construction, Analysis, and Caricature. Don't worry, you can always go back and watch the replay of the video. This is too fast to remember. The Weatherly Guide to Drawing Animals. This one was a Carl Ganass recommendation. And How to Draw Animals by Jack Ham. Again, same guy who did the Seascape and Landscape book. And then also Tara Whitlatch. I've not taken her course, but I believe she has a course on creature design on schoolism. Schoolism is another one. When I mentioned about leveling up, I have not taken any schoolism courses, but I've watched tons of Bobby Chu's videos, and the instructors they have are great. It looks like the courses they have are great. If I could find the time, I would very much like to be taking at least one schoolism course at any given time, in addition to parallel to my studies in figure drawing classes. For me, the biggest problem I have right now is time, working a full-time day job, making personal artwork, and taking usually just one class at a time. I mean, I would love to be a full-time student, just learning how to become a better illustrator, learning more about anatomy, environmental design, light, form, volume, vehicle design, like just all of the aspects of drawing and illustrating. I feel like I didn't get that when I was in my undergraduate program, and I'm trying to catch up as much as I can now. But I will 100% co-sign what Amar said about if you can draw humans and animals well, then you can make up creatures. Rossi says, I sleep with my sketchbook. I have multiple sketchbooks. It's like having weapons cached around the house. I've got like sketchbooks in every room of the house. So at any point, if I think of some ideas, I'm like, all right, let me just jot this down. Let me sketch that down. The main problem comes in terms of having to dig up and find the ideas again later when I decide that I do need them for something or I want to refine them. And Amar also says you can't succeed without failing. And Castile says you learn from your crap too. You cry, you feel pain to learn. Everyone learns by their mistakes. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I do that section. When I do those live streams where I'm working over my bad drawings from class, I learn so much more from my bad drawings, because that's another thing. You feel like, I don't know if you've gone through the phase of just saying, I want to get better, I just don't know how. I've watched people in figure drawing classes literally say that, and they're beating themselves up and they're feeling super frustrated. The best teaching tool for you are your bad drawings, because your bad drawings are like you keep saying, not you specifically, but artists will say, I want to get better, I don't know how, or what am I doing wrong? Your bad drawings are a big neon sign flashing to show you what you don't know. When you draw a piece of anatomy and it looks funky, you're like, oh, I need to open an anatomy book, and I need to look at a model and look at the photo reference, and hopefully study that I always say studying from real life figure drawing is the best teacher. But when you draw something that comes out poorly, just going back and looking at those drawings and saying, all right, I need to study this thing that I drew poorly. That helps so very much. I will tell you that this drawing is a lot lumpier, I feel, than it should be. You know what? I don't need those little lines in there. I feel like I do need something to indicate the fact that this is changing direction. But for some reason, that's not it, and that's not it. I mean, realistically, I think the reason why those lines are bothering me is because it should just be a nice, soft tone that's indicating that. I'm doing what should be tonal work, I'm doing it in lines instead. And I could just lower the opacity and come in with tone and work all of these with tone, but hell, we're at an hour 45 here. So let me jam through and add a little bit of the, see, I didn't even draw his other arm wrapped around from the other side. All of this stuff that I've been drawing, I didn't come in and finish that up. So let me get in here because we're going close to 2 hours now. And believe it or not, I have other stuff I have to draw when I'm done with this this live stream. So see, you guys are just too damn fun to talk to. I get caught up with the jibber jabber and they're talking about influences and different artists. Having such a good time that I end up going way, way longer than I thought I would. But you know, one thing I hope you guys do is I hope you do check out Adolphe Bouguereau. That link that I put in the description and in the chat at the beginning. If you have not heard of him, you have not seen his work, please definitely check him out. He's an amazing artist, very much worth your time. I only have one Bouguereau art book, but you know, he's a guy that I could just spend endlessly hours studying. There were a couple of pieces I studied where I went through and I put little blackout bars over the breasts. And he does a lot of beautiful nudes. And for some reason, YouTube, you know, even if you've got a piece that, you know, people can go and see in a museum, you know, YouTube will still be very locked down in terms of, you know, letting you live stream, showing a piece that's got nudity in it. So don't want to get any strikes against the channel. But yeah, I have other Bouguereau pieces to do studies from. And this is not the last one that I'll do. I don't know for sure if I'll do one next week or not. On one hand, I'm tempted to put it to a vote. On the other hand, I'm like, I don't want to vote. Have you guys say yes? And then I come sit down to draw next week. And I'm like, I want to work on something else. Because I was very torn between doing this study and continuing to work on those Medusa pieces I started last week. But I just felt like it would be nice to change pace a little bit. Not do the same thing every week. You know, and I don't know why I feel like I need to worry about that. When I was doing comic stuff, I didn't mind you guys watching me draw the same comic page every week or the next page in the same issue. You know, I was going on, you know, just page after page after page. I don't know why it should be any different with doing studies or illustrations. maybe I'm being a little bit too self-conscious about what I'm drawing instead of just focusing on being here with you guys and making whatever I'm making. Yeah, these feet, I'm trying to capture a sense of volume and structure, those primitive forms I've been talking about this whole time. But I'm also, it's very slapdash because of how quickly I'm trying to block it all in. When I finish this part, I'm going to come up and just read through the last few comments, and then we're going to wrap up here. Because like I said, I'll be here all day talking with you guys otherwise, which is fun. It's what I come here for. But hey, if you guys are not getting enough, like I said, Patreon, we're doing Art Book Study Group tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So that'll be and that's usually a 2.5 to 3 hour live stream. So we'll be doing those tomorrow night. And yes, Amar, I will put this in the Discord. All right, so I should go ahead and finish the wings. And there's stuff in here that I should do also, like a lot of these hash marks that I put in here, these really shouldn't be hash marks. In fact, that's the last thing I'm going to do is just correct that. It shouldn't just be me coming in and putting in hash marks. It's tone, it's tonal, and what I should do is come in here, like just what I did in the abs, the shoulder, the kneecap. What I should really be doing is dropping the opacity, enlarging the brush, and just coming in. Oh wait, that's the eraser. Drop the opacity, enlarge the brush. And this should really be tone. And that's something that, I got caught up in all of the linear drawing. And yes, this is more like drawing in marker as opposed to doing the tonal work that you might do if you were drawing with a charcoal pencil, which is what I tend to use. That's my weapon of choice for doing figure drawings. But really this tonal work, the point is simply to just identify what surfaces are facing towards the light versus away from the light. The underside surfaces are darker than the above surfaces. And the surfaces that are facing to the left of the light source versus the right of the light source. I mean, this whole image is lit above and from the left. And really, you can see that by the highlight that's on the thigh. Like, it's mostly above lighting, but you do see that while it's above and it's favoring the left side of the figure because on the right side is just more shadow. I need to make a mental note to remember when I'm doing these studies to try not to do too much of the anatomy in line. And really, a lot of this anatomy, you can really sell a piece by doing a lot of this stuff that I'm drawing in here and a lot of the anatomical structures I was putting in, to do those in tone and really save the line work just for like the main silhouettes. It's something that in my figure drawing class recently, I was called out for doing overpowering anatomy. Called out in a good way. Being called on things I should do better. Drawing too much of the anatomy or drawing it too dark, too heavy. And really, I should be letting the tone do a lot of the work. All right. Super long live stream for a good reason, because I've been having fun with you guys, having great conversations, and I'm enjoying doing this study. It's always good times with you guys. Last couple of comments in the chat there. You guys had a great conversation about productivity and life, and I wish I had time to go through and read through all of this. But let me just see. Yes. Oh, Solid Snake is in the chat. How you doing? We're having a lively conversation in here. Yes, Amar mentions fail and repeat, learn from mistakes. And don't wait for perfection. Always words of wisdom, man. Let's see. Castle says art is hard. A lot of people give up or do something bad and call that it's my style or my gift. Let's see here. Yeah, Amar mentions I need to get stuff done too, but I'm losing time working on my 9 to 5s. I need 3 solid years, maybe 5, to just do comics and animation. Wow, man, I know how you feel. What would actually be nice is to be able to, every 3 to 5 years, to be able to take a 1-year sabbatical. I think that would be nice, is to be able to just do it kind of in the background. And then every few years, I know there are people who work full-time in animation that make it 8.2 take a sabbatical. Let's see here. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff about the difficulty and challenges of making art while working full time. And yeah, I mean, I'm right there with all of you guys. This is its reality. Neymar says you lose energy and desire of accomplishing your dreams the older you get. That it's true, and it's tough, because at a certain point you realize, you know what? What part of it is, like, when you watch even people that you love and admire just make art, then over time people don't necessarily remember things that you thought were great. You start realizing, are we doing all this thinking we're going to be remembered in history? And the truth is nah, who knows? People may not even remember me in 50 years, maybe 10 years after I'm gone. People don't even necessarily know me now. Only, a certain number of people have read my comics. So in the end, it's like I'm really doing it simply for the act of the creative process and how much I love engaging in it. Thank you, Amar. He says, "Wow, I was talking. I look up and you added that female there pretty quickly." Well, honestly, when I shut up and draw and focus, I can actually get a lot done. And part of it is that, like I told you, that the blocking in those early pieces, that's the hard part for me. Getting all those things right. Once I get that in, rendering unto itself, it can be time consuming if you're trying to do photorealistic rendering. But if I'm just simply trying to say, this is the side the object is lit from, and this is the shadow side, that can be done fairly quickly. Let's see here. Rossi says, having your own business yet coexisting in the corporate world, corporates won't have it. I mentioned my own business. They felt I no longer belonged there. They felt overruled. I'm lucky that I work in a creative environment, and they actually, it depends on the job. Like, there's some companies where you work for them, they try to own everything that you make. But those are things that, instead of just signing the contract, you can negotiate with that. You can go to HR and say, look, I'm an independent creator and I intentionally create things that are different than what you do, and it's not competitive products. There's a reason why most of my comics tend to be horror and fantasy and darker stuff. It's because I work for a toy company, so I don't want to make. Let me put it this way: I have ideas that could be very Pixar-ish, very toy-ish, and I shy away from those because I want to do stuff that is it's its own thing. It doesn't compete with what I do at my day job. So I try to keep the two worlds very separate. Depends on what you're doing and where you work. All right, guys. So this has been a very, very great live stream. A big reason for me staying on extra long and chatting and talking is because of how great the chat is, how great you guys are to talk to, and how fun it is. So I greatly appreciate it. I greatly appreciate you guys. Again, to wrap up, for those that want to get even more of this, want to hop onto Patreon, patreon.com/GERIMI. There's a link in the description that takes to my link tree. Patreon's on there. Click on over to the Patreon and sign up. You can join the art book study group. You can catch the replay if you're busy. If tomorrow at 7 p.m. Pacific time doesn't work for you, you can always watch the other ones. You can watch all of the previous ones we've done. We haven't finished George Bridgman's book, but we also did a long run on George Bridgman, a bunch of episodes we did with Ken Holtzgren, The Art of Animal Drawing. And again, if you haven't read Morningstar yet, you can read it on there on Patreon and digitally. And you can see so much more behind the scenes process work that I haven't shared on Instagram or here on YouTube. Tons of stuff. It's a treasure trove. It's literally like living in my studio. That's what Patreon, that's what I try to create it as. My newsletter.jeremy.net. You get a free digital sketchbook, has the first 3 issues of Morningstar in the rough pencil form, but lettered, so you can kind of read it and see how I put the issue together. And also, I send out that newsletter once a month. You'll be getting one at the beginning of September. That one, it'll have links to new art prints that I have, work in progress animated GIFs. I try to do a book or a TV review, just mentioning what I'm reading or watching. Throw a little bit on there. I call it the media diet, just what I'm consuming. All that's in the newsletter. Like I said, newsletter.jeremy.net. Go over, sign up for that. Again, links in the link tree. And amazon.jeremy.net. As I mentioned before, Eye of the Gods, psychological thriller about man cursed with visions he cannot control. Morningstar, Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. This volume has issues 1 through 4. The first half of the series. And the conclusion of the series. There's still some single issues left of issues 5, 6, 7, and 8. But issue 8 was recently published earlier this year. It's the final issue of the series, the dramatic conclusion. You can pick that up. Also, on Comixology, if you read digitally, all of that is there for you guys to check out. Again, thank you so much for all the great comments, the feedback, the really interesting discussion. I enjoyed hanging out with all you guys. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your interest. I appreciate you hanging out with me. That's it for now. All of you, go be creative.